So let's just talk about your experience before we get into your career in Hollywood, Larry. Let's talk about, how did you come to work with John Jay and talk a little bit about what you were doing? Because if I'm not mistaken, I don't know if you were a co-host, but they called you a stunt guy or a stunt. What was the term that they used for you?
Yeah.
And what did you do?
So many terms. John Jay, so many terms he gave me in titles. It really started at the adult contemporary station up in South Haven. Cozy 98.3 was the station back in that day, which is hilarious that they take this I was still in high school when I got hired out there. Paul Landecker, the program director, hired me. And it was to do like just the weather. That was my first on-air thing, was like just say the weather when you get online. And then he gave me like the Sunday morning show up there. And it was so bizarre because you're talking about a 17-year-old Mattawan High School graduate, this black kid, going to South Haven to do like Seals and Crofts and Lionel Richie on a Sunday morning with the soccer moms.
Summer breeze makes me feel fine.
Totally. And I started falling in love with that genre because of that. I was like, why am I here? So I did that for like a year or so. And then, because it's the same company, John Jay down in Benton Harbor came across me somehow, and he's like, you want to call in and do like a Bill Cosby voice for this bit that we're doing at the rock station? I was like, yeah. He loved it. And then pretty soon he just said, well, why don't you come in a couple days a week and be our stunt guy? And he called me Larry Hormone was the name. That was my character's name on the show, because I was, this like, at that point, a little young college kid running around trying to talk to girls and failing miserably at it. And he's like, this is going to be perfect. So I'd go in, and whatever the topic of the day was at the morning show, whatever came across John's eye news-wise, he'd have me take the screaming yellow Hummer. You remember that?
Yeah.
I'd get on this Rock 107 screaming yellow Hummer, and I'd go out in the community, either as a character or as myself, and ask people these stupid questions about the river rising. The St. Joe River, it's going to rise too much. What do you think about that? And it was just insanity.
Yeah.
Pure insanity, 3-4 days a week.
And so let's talk, because most of the show is going to be talking about your career in Hollywood, no question, because that's where you took off. But this is Radio Day, so I want to delve into the radio aspect of that. For someone who might not work in the business, one of my listeners, talk about what an average day would be like. Now, when you would come in, did you have an idea? Did you guys talk about it the day before, what you were going to cover? How was the day to day, and what made you guys decide what you were going to write and what kind of parodies and what kind of content you guys were going to create?
Most of it was the morning of, so I'd leave. I was living in Kalamazoo at the time, so I'd leave Kalamazoo at like 4 a.m, drive down to Benton Harbor, and before we went on the air, John and whoever the co-host was and I would sit and talk about, okay, let's have Larry go out and do that. I remember the St. Joe River, the levels were low. This is a perfect example. The levels were low. He said, why don't you go out and ask people, tell them that they're going to tug an iceberg from Alberta, Canada, all the way up the St. Joe River and then melt it in the river. And you got to say it with absolute certainty like you're a news reporter, and this is fact. And, and then walk around downtown St. Joe and ask these old retired people if they think it's a good idea. And so that's what I would do, or a character or whatever. So we would start early in the morning, get the plan. I'd go out in the Hummer. I had a character that you could not do today called Riri.
Riri.
I don't know if you remember this.
I remember Riri.
You remember Riri. We had this football helmet, okay, and Riri, all I can say is that he was a very emotional guy, right? And he would go, and I would, we didn't want them to know that it was a radio stunt. So when Riri went out and talked to people in public, I would just take my crappy college car, and I would jam a cell phone inside the helmet so we could broadcast it live. And I'd go up to like the counter at a gas station, and then Riri always had an emotional fit right before he went to make the purchase or whatever. And he would just be like, "Ugh!" And all they would hear is just Riri screaming and wailing in the background and having a hard time dealing in public. And that was the bit. John and Rick and Phil or whoever were just laughing in the background. Bit's over. Morning show is done. Yeah.
Now, was there ever a situation where you were like, you know what, I know this would be funny, but I'm not comfortable doing that? Because no. I got to tell you, when I remember you, I remember you had a reputation around the entire building as you'll do whatever the fuck. I mean, you didn't give a shit. You would do whatever.
I didn't care. Well, because you know what? The biggest thing is I trusted John Jay. He is his comedic timing and his story structure and everything. Whatever idea that he had, I was like, hey, let's go, Chief. You know, like, I'm down. There was one time where we had a segment called Larry's Lab. Okay. So whenever the morning show came across some weird scientific fact of the week, he had a little theme song for me, and we would put it to test. We have Larry go out and test, like, can the human body really handle a gallon of milk within 1 hour without getting sick, or whatever the case is.
That's so brilliant.
Terrible. So I never really said no to anything because John Jay, he didn't have to work hard to convince me. I just trusted him.
Right.
You know, I trusted him. We did everything, man. We did everything on that show.
That was, I think that was my second full-time job in broadcasting. And I got to tell you, John Jay and who was his sidekick, Phil? Right?
His brother. Yeah, brother Phil was there, and then before him it was Rick. John Jay and Rick, John Jay and Phil, yeah.
And who was the PD at that time?
Probably Shelley Morgan.
Yeah, Shelley Morgan, yes.
Yeah.
Very strong PD.
John Vance was one, yeah.